Hey everybody, welcome to another video here on the 67 Stang channel. I know it's been a little bit. I think the last one I did was about driving the old girl down the highway. So since then I've been on the road a lot. Got a new job that I started a few months ago that's required me to travel a good bit. But anyway, one thing I'm noticing is it's getting colder, right? So let's talk about what you might need to do to your car as we head into the winter months. So we'll get started on that here in just a moment. Okay, so we're heading into the winter months. It's now towards the end of October, and even down here in Georgia, it's starting to get cold. So for that, means a lot of us are probably going to be putting up our classic cars and not driving them a whole lot more as we head into these colder months. So what kind of things do you need to do to winterize your car as you head into these winter months? What sort of things do you need to look at and check and all that? So that's what I'm going to kind of talk about here. Now keep in mind, again, I'm not a mechanic. I'm a computer guy that does mapping and surveying type work. So all of the recommendations and stuff I'm going to tell you come from a little bit of research I've done online, as well as I think some common sense items, plus some things that my dad and grandfather had shared with me over the course of the years here. So there are several things you need to do to take care of as you head in. Now, what you need to do and how far you need to go with winterizing your car is going to depend on a couple of things. First, are you putting the car up for the winter? So you're not going to drive it at all. Now, for me, that's probably not going to be the case. I'm in Georgia. We don't get really cold winters for the most part. We have a couple of days, weeks, maybe, where it'll get down below freezing, sometimes down into the teens, but it usually doesn't stay that way for very long, and often in the middle of February, we're hitting 70 degrees again. So there are a good chance that I may have some good days over the course of the winter here in Georgia where I'm going to be driving the car. So there's, I'm not going to have to winterize it as much as say some of y'all that may live up north in New York or Illinois or North Dakota or wherever there. So that's going to be one of the things you have to look at, or think about as you're winterizing your cars. What does that mean for you, right? Are you going to drive it, or are you going to be putting it up for the entire winter? And then, of course, how long is that going to be? How long are you going to have that vehicle in storage, right? So, that's also going to impact what you need to do to the car. So when you consider that, then you can start looking at, so what systems do you need to think about, look at as you're looking towards winterizing the car? Well, some of these, again, should be fairly obvious. You need to look at, well, first off, the tires, right? The inflation on the tires. During the winter, when it's colder, the pressure in your tires will decrease due to the temperature and molecules moving and all these things that are science stuff I'm not going to get into. But you definitely, as it gets colder, if you're going to drive your car, check the inflation on your tires, right? Also, it's a good time to check the condition, the tread of your tires, right? If you're going to be driving it, are you going to be putting snow tires on the car? Maybe. It's your car. I know I wouldn't probably drive mine out in the snow anymore. I have. Anyway, right? So check the tread on the tire. Do you have good tread on the tires? I'm not worried about mine. Mine are brand new, but I'm going to be looking at it from an alignment standpoint, especially on the, with the front end here, right? Is the wear on the tire being even? That's another good thing to do when you're winterizing cars. There's some good checks that are worth doing while you're going through this process that you may not do on a regular basis. But anyway, so we're going to check the inflation of the tires. We're going to check those things out. Obviously, the coolant system needs to be looked at. We'll talk a little bit about looking at the coolant system and making sure it's up to the task of handling the additional cold temperatures that you're going to be dealing with. A lot of times we're worried about the overall cooling of the car. Is it overheating? Well, as we start heading into winter, that's not as big a concern in most cases. But does it have the wherewithal to handle the colder temperatures, so you don't get the block freezing and causing other problems there? The charging system, you talk and look at that. And we'll talk more about that. And then, of course, the fuel system, right? We need to look at the fuel system, or think about the fuel system as well. So let's get in here and start looking at these. I'll talk specifically about certain parts of these various systems and what I'm going to do, and some things you may want to check as you go to winterize your car. So let's get in and take a look. Okay, we're going to go ahead and start talking about the fuel system, right? If you're going to be parking your car for a while, for a few months, and you're using ethanol fuel. Now, I'm lucky where I'm at, I have access to non-ethanol fuel. Non-ethanol fuel, from what I understand, again, I'm no mechanic, is more stable than ethanol-based fuel. So, if you're going to be parking your car for a while, and you have ethanol-based fuel in there, then would really recommend putting in some sort of fuel stabilizer. Just pouring it right here in the tank. It will go in and help keep the fuel so that it stays good for a few months as you've got the car parked. It doesn't start to go bad, turn to varnish. We've seen all the first start videos with the fuel that sat there for years and how bad that gets. You don't want that. You don't want to be gunking up your fuel system because you parked the car for the winter. So I recommend going in, again, putting some fuel stabilizer if you're using ethanol fuels. If you're non-ethanol, I don't think it's as critical. Please correct me if I'm wrong down in the comments, so that we can make sure I'm giving good advice to folks. So I just want to, we've got a neighbor walking by. So this is the joys of filming when you're out in your own garage. And he's on his phone talking to somebody. Anyway, back to the fuel system. So you want to do that. It's also a good time to get under the car, check the conditions of your fuel lines, especially those rubber lines. Get down there and take a look at them, right? Check your wiring connections and things, right? So calm down, get up under there, like I'm about to do. Climb down here and check, see. Make sure those fuel lines are supple. Those rubber lines are not cracked or split. Mine look really good, which I expect, because they're all new. I gotta get my hat from under there. Anyway, so fuel system's pretty basic. Also, probably if you haven't checked it, a good time to look at fuel filters and maybe replacing those while you can. Anyway, so that's the basics on the fuel system. So now let's go to the other end of the car and talk about the cooling system and the charging systems. Let's go. Okay, so let's start with the cooling system first. So a couple of things, obviously, that you're going to need to check on your cooling system. First is, does it have coolant in it? Duh, right? So I know a lot of times when we get these cars running and whatnot, we'll start by just putting water in the radiator, which is great and fine in the middle of summer. But as we head into winter, water by itself is not good. If you have your car parked and it's going to get below freezing, water is going to do what water does when it gets below freezing. It's going to freeze. And you don't want that happening in your engine block, right? It will freeze in the block. That's what freeze plugs are for. That's why they're called freeze plugs. In theory, if water does freeze, those plugs provide a release point for the freezing water, right? As the water freezes and expands, it'll push out the freeze plugs instead of theoretically cracking the block. That doesn't always happen. So you want to make sure you've got antifreeze in there. Now, once you've verified that there is indeed antifreeze and not just water, you need to test the level of protection, I guess that's a good way of putting it, that the antifreeze provides. There are a few ways or methods to test that. Now, I've got a couple of examples here. So first, I picked this up today from the local auto parts store. It's a antifreeze coolant tester. So this tester is pretty simple. It's very cheap, it's like $3. So according to directions here, you make sure the engine's cool, so not running, which means I can't do this immediately because I actually have been having fun in the car, driving it around. So make sure the engine's cool. Take your radiator cap or your expansion tank, overflow tank cap off. You suck liquid up into, using the bulb here, up in, and then you can read the scale here, and it will tell you what level of protection you will have with this. So how cold can it get before it starts to freeze, right? So, and it's both in, this one has Fahrenheit and Celsius, right? So you can do that. And it also depends on the pressure on the cap. So this is, it's sea level with a 15-pound cap. Anyway, then there's ways you can talk about, you know, how to do it. So anyway, so pretty simple, straightforward thing. I'm not sure how accurate this is, but you know, it's better than nothing. Another thing you can use is a refractometer. Okay, so this is actually not one that's gauged for the car. This is actually for my saltwater fish tank. I can get it open. Ooh. Yay. Okay, hold on. We're going to get this open. Okay, I'm back. I got it open. So as I said, this is for my saltwater fish tank. I use this to check the salinity of the water in my tank to make sure it's the right levels. But it works the same way. As a matter of fact, it looks almost exactly the same. It's just what it's gauged to do on the inside. Like I said, this is gauged to measure salt. So what you'll do is you take a drop out of your radiator or overflow, just like the other one. With this little thing, you put the drop, when you lift this up, you put the drop on here, you close this, and then you'll put, you know, make sure there's a light source here, and then you look through here, and through the eyepiece here, there's a gauge right in there. And it'll tell you, just like this has on here, it's, you know, set up, so it'll tell you as you look through here the level of protection and things you have. Now one of these is theoretically more accurate because you can adjust it to 0 and whatnot. And these run somewhere around $20–25 for a refractometer. So, but either one of these will work for you to allow you to test the level of protection your coolant is providing in your system. Obviously, if you know you live in a cold area, you want to make sure you're protected. You know, like I said, you don't want your block to freeze. No. Or your radiator or your heater core. Okay? So now let's look at something else that when I mentioned heater core came to my mind that we probably want to look at and check. So let's pop the hood and take a look underneath. Okay, so the thing that came to my mind while we were talking about the coolant system, and I mentioned the heater core, is for, again, many of us, as we're first getting cars like this started, we often bypass the heater core. So you can see there is there's a T in there used primarily for flushing, but that was also used briefly to bypass the heater core on this car because I knew the heater core had a massive leak in it. Now obviously I've since redone all the hoses so that it's not doing that anymore. So the heater core is set up well. But if you've bypassed your heater core, you might want to go ahead and fix that before winter, especially if you're going to be driving the car and you want to be warm inside, because without the heater core connected, you're not going to have heat inside, right? So make sure you verify that, get things squared away however you need to ensure that you have the heat in there. So again, something to remember. It's very easy to get going and forget, especially if you've only been driving in the summer, you haven't used the heater at all. So, you know, take that into account, you know, double check it, whatnot. Which also is a good time If you're doing all that, to go ahead and flush your system out. If you haven't, take and flush the coolant out, get any rust in the system out, and just make sure the cooling system is in good shape for the winter. Remember, the cooling system, yes, is there to keep the engine cool, but it's also there to help protect the engine, during these cold months, to make sure that the coolant doesn't freeze, that it also helps lubricate some parts in there, the water pump and things as well. So just, take the time. It's a good time before it gets too cold to go ahead and flush the system out there. So on these old cars, they're good, but do keep in mind, depending on what kind of coolant you're using, you want to catch it and not leave it going down into all the creeks and the streams, because it can be bad for the animals and stuff. Okay, so now let's talk about the charging system. Okay, again, this is always going to be dependent on what you're doing with the car. Is it going to be driving some during the winter? Is it going to be parked most of the winter? Those kind of things. If you're going to park it for a good chunk of the winter, you probably want to go ahead and disconnect the battery or pull it out completely. If possible, put it on some sort of trickle charger. Cold will eat up a battery. It will help take power away from it. So, disconnecting it is great. Again, pulling it out of the car and putting it on some sort of trickle charger so it stays powered. I don't know, active. I don't know what the right word is, but while you're not using it, because batteries don't like to sit. They sit a while without a charge, they'll bleed out. And depending on the type of the battery and the quality and all that, you can have problems when you go to put it back in later. If you're going to be driving it, right, during the course of winter, you can potentially leave it in there. Again, if you're in an area that gets very, very cold, you might want to put it on a trickle charger just to keep it charged, so that when you go to hit it later, it's got the power it needs. And those things. Also a good time while you're here to go ahead and check, the battery, how much, power, voltage, amperage, whatever it is that's putting out there. So let's go ahead and do that. Let me go get my tester and we'll give it a shot. Okay, so now to check the battery, make sure it's still good or it's got enough charge on it, I'm going to use my multimeter here. I'm just going to go set it over here to 12 volts. See if I can set it where you can hopefully see what's going on. Yeah. Anyway, I'll show it to you. But cross these together, make sure I'm getting 0. You can see that 0. Then I'm going to take the black, go over here to the ground, kind of shove it there, and then take the red over here to the positive. And I'm getting, let's see if I can shove this down here so you can see that, 12.67 volts. It's a 12 volt battery, so we're good here. The battery has got a good charge on it, so we should be good with that. So that's how you can check the battery to see what kind of power that's in there using a multimeter. Good way to check that out. So now let's get on to the other stuff. Okay, camera cut out, so I don't know what I was saying, so we'll splice this in as best we can. Anyway, as I was saying, during the summer, you may have run a thicker oil in your engine to account for the extra heat, to keep your oil pressure up and the engine well lubricated. As we go into the winter and it gets colder, you may not need as thick of an oil in there. So you may want to check that, consider that. If you're running a thicker oil, go ahead and do an oil change. I just ran the normal 10W30 or 40, I forget which one, I think 40 in here, and was getting fine oil pressure. It would crank up at about 45 pounds of pressure, and then after it warmed up it would drop down to 30, but it stayed consistent, did good, so I didn't bother to do that. It's a fairly good engine here, so but something to keep in mind, something to think about as you're again, winterizing your car. And I'm just trying to think of everything out. Other little sundry things you may want to check while you're getting ready is, your squirter level, especially if you're going to be driving it in the winter. You might get, dirty snow and all that kicked up in your windshield. So you want to make sure you fill that squirter reservoir, as I call it, up. And you can see I need to fill mine up. It's also a good chance to look at all of your hoses, right? So mine are fairly good, and I know no one likes these flexi hoses, I think Mortski calls them there, but it's what I put on there. Anyway, most all of my hoses are new. Well, not most, they all are new. So I'm not worried too much about my hoses. Again, remember, you've got fuel lines that are going to run up here. So check fuel lines that are coming up there. So here's mine. Again, these are all new, so I know mine are in good shape, but double check that. Good time to go ahead and pop your master cylinder open. I'm not going to do that, but pop it open, check your brake levels. Pardon me. I will do that later, I promise. Although I just drove it and the brakes were fine, but never hurts to double check. The hoses that go up to your squirters. Again, I've replaced all those, so I know mine are in good shape there. So good time to just give an overall once over. And something to look at, and please don't kill me for having these plastic windshield wipers on there. And I'll get the stainless back on there. So check your wiper blades. Make sure they're good. Again, you may find yourself driving in bad weather if you're going to be driving it in the winter. And make sure, you've got some good working blades on there. Other than that, in the winter, if you drive it, you're going to certainly find out about your weather stripping and whether it needs to be replaced. But probably a good time to put some treatment on all the rubber weather seals and all that as you head into winter. It's going to get colder to prevent them from cracking and keeping them in good shape for time to come. So let's see if I can think of anything else to look at. Oh, wiring is another good, again, while you're doing it, check the wiring out. Make sure the insulation's in good shape. You don't have anything fraying or coming loose. Check for leaks, all that. Again, just good stuff to do while you're checking stuff here. So anyway, I think that's about it. Okay, so there you have it. That's all the tips and tricks I can think of for winterizing your car. Again, remember, it's going to depend on, are you going to drive it? How long is it going to be parked? What kind of gas is in it? And those kind of things that you need to take into account as you're getting ready to put your car in storage for the winter. So I'm lucky, I'm down here in Georgia, so we don't have much of a winter compared to other parts of the world. So, I'm not gonna have to do a whole lot on mine. I'm gonna check the coolant, although I have, I flushed it earlier this year. I am probably gonna flush it again since I put the new radiator in it, make sure all the stuff that was there because the old radiator and whatnot has been flushed through, although I tried to flush it really well. But we'll check that out. Whatnot, I'll verify my tire pressure, checking the tread on the car and all that. But otherwise, it's going to be very simple for me to winterize the car. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful. Hope you've enjoyed it. If anybody else has any other suggestions or comments, please leave them below. Share those with us. As I said, I'm not a mechanic by any stretch of any imagination, so there may be some things I forgot, maybe some things I got wrong. Hey, I admit it. I don't know everything by a large stretch, as my wife reminds me often. Anyway, anyway, again, hope you've enjoyed it. Make sure to give the video a thumbs up if you did. If you didn't, you can do a dislike if you have that added. I think YouTube. Anyway, subscribe to the channel. We do have some other things I want to do. I have been driving the car a good bit. I went to the grocery store today and then just kind of went cruising because it's where it was cold in the morning. It was nice and around 68 degrees this afternoon. So perfect cruising weather. But I did notice that when I would go, it sounded like there was a clunk. So I'm thinking that I need to check the universal joints on the drive shaft. Now I do have replacements over on my shelves over there to do this. So we may be putting new U-joints on it, which will be fun because I've never done that and I don't have a press. There. Also thinking I may at some point put new wheel bearings on the car because these may be original wheel bearings. Now I got the car running and did the brakes on it to get it running and stopping. I did repack them all and they seemed okay, but wouldn't hurt to give them a once over there. Also have some other plans coming up on the vehicle. I'm trying to talk my wife into letting me get some new seats to put in the car. I am going to go, and I think I mentioned this before, with something a little different than the stock seats. So looking at some, okay, so I love the pony interior that was in the 65 and 66. I think that was sharp looking. I don't really like the deluxe interior that came with 67s and 68s. So I'm looking at going with a pony interior from TMI on the front seats, but also upgrading these seats to new ones that have more bolstering in them, also where the back locks so I don't get my face thrown into the steering wheel there. So hopefully we can get that going. I'm also seriously thinking about replacing the gauges. I'm tired of fighting with these, and I'm thinking about going with some Dakota Digital. We'll have to see. Love to hear your thoughts on that. But with that, guys, I hope you've enjoyed it again. I'll see y'all in the next video.